risk scales better than effort. So what do I mean by that? You kind of graduate from college, you go down like a typical path, hey, let me go join like a multinational company, just like follow a traditional pathway. If you're just doing that and not taking any risk and everyone else is doing that, your outcome would be very similar to them.
Confidence is not a precondition for doing hard things. So I've been guilty of this. I see a lot of other kind of younger folks doing this as well. They don't want to take on something hard or something that they haven't done before because they feel like they don't have the confidence to do it, right? But what you need to realize is confidence isn't something you need to do the hard thing. It's something you get after you do the hard thing. Welcome back to the Superhuman podcast. Lately, we've been doing these one-off episodes where we try something different. So last week, we did a podcast on how you'd make $100,000 to $1 million if you had to do it within 12 months. A bit of a kind of left field episode for us, but the response was phenomenal. We got so many people who emailed in saying that they enjoyed it. We also got a lot of recommendations for new episodes. So since we're trying to be more kind of listener-led than picking our own topics, we kept getting questions about, career-related stuff, right? So today's episode, we're going to dedicate to that. So we're going to try and get through as many career lessons as we can within the next half hour. With that being said, Hassan, hit us. What is your first big career lesson that you want to share with the listeners?
I think the first thing, which is just stayed with me since day one, even until now, I think it's like super critical, is that risk scales better than effort. So what do I mean by that, right? So you kind of graduate from college, you go down like a typical path, hey, let me go join like a multinational company, go investment bank, management consulting firm, do 2-3 years there, go to like a top business school, then come back, become a PM at like, some tech company, and just like follow a traditional pathway. If you're just doing that and not taking any risk and everyone else is doing that, your outcome would be very similar to them. But early on, the best thing is that you should be taking bigger risks. So what does that mean? That means, hey, you can join an early stage startup. You can go left field and try to do things, maybe work for a company which is unknown, but there's a massive learning opportunity. Your boss is awesome. The company is growing like super fast, but they don't have a brand. Those type of risks, the ROI down the road is massive because one, you will get way more responsibility, you will learn way faster. And what will end up happening is that you'll get more responsibility and bigger opportunities down the road. And I think a lot of people think about that you need to play it safe early on. You need to go with the big brand names. But if you're going with a big brand name, they're not gonna like take massive risks on you. But like smaller companies will always take massive risks on you. So I think, and the summary like for the first lesson is risk scales better than effort.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And even if you're in your job and you don't want to change a job or start your career fresh, I think you can think about the different types of projects within the company that are less popular than other projects, right? A good way to think about this, for example, are problems that nobody wants to touch because they're so difficult. And a good thing about these difficult problems, honestly, is if no one's been able to solve it and you're not able to solve it, so what? You're just one more person who wasn't able to solve this problem. But if you can solve that problem, suddenly that kind of, boosts your credibility through the door. Supercharge your startup with Google Cloud. Ready to take your startup to the next level? The Google for Startups Cloud program offers $350,000 in free credit, expert guidance, and cutting-edge AI tools. Don't miss this opportunity. Apply now at cloud.google.com/startup/apply. Okay, next lesson is that confidence is not a precondition for doing hard things. In fact, confidence is what you get sort of as a reward or side effect once you do the hard things. So I've been guilty of this. I see a lot of other kind of younger folks doing this as well. Honestly, a lot of older folks doing this as well, is they don't want to take on something hard or something that they haven't done before because they feel like they don't have the confidence to do it, right? It's like everyone understands that feeling. Oh, this is so hard, haven't done this, what if I fail, so on and so forth. And you kind of like never take that on. But if you don't take on more things, you don't learn more things, and you kind of, are sort of stuck in this negative loop is, I don't have the confidence, I'm not going to do hard things, which means you don't do hard things, which means you don't gain confidence, and you're in this negative loop. But what you need to realize is confidence isn't something you need to do the hard thing, it's something you get after you do the hard thing. So, if you look back at your childhood, anyone who's played sports, let's just say you're playing baseball, if you've never swung a bat, obviously you don't have the confidence, but once you start swinging the bat, suddenly you start getting better and, you gain that confidence. If you've played soccer, in the beginning, no one knows how to hit a ball. Then you learn, you need to side foot it and you need to do all these other things. Slowly, you learn how to do it and you build confidence. Same with, tennis. Can't hit a ball in the beginning. Suddenly, once you do it for a few days, for a few weeks, for a few months, slowly you get better at that skill. So it's something that we sort of intuitively understand in our childhood, but once we become adults, we become a little bit more risk averse and we try not to do these hard things. So the second thing I would say is if you're not confident about something, forget about it. Don't worry about the confidence thing. Just focus on doing the hard thing and the confidence will come to you.
Yeah, I think like one interesting thing is I have a 1-year-old daughter, right? So like I see her trying things, and it's like so true, right? Like that's how babies learn, right? Like the first time she tries something, she's a bit shy, she's a bit hesitant. She does it the second time, the third time, and then she's like 4 times. She's like, yeah, like I just know this, and it's like amazing seeing like babies how they compound in their growth, in their learning as well. And I think as adults we forget that's how we learn growing up as well. We tried things, we failed, then we got better at it, and then we, learned how to cycle, how to play sports, walk, all of these things. Like that's natural. So failing should not be like a deterrent. And then I think more real life adult example is that as we have been building like a new product company, I've also started like coding again, and it's really hard, right? Like I've not coded for like years, and just to be honest, I was very hesitant even trying it. And just because like, hey, you're really good at something, you're not really good at something, you're just going to fail miserably. But I think slowly and steadily I've gotten better, but you just have to have a beginner's mindset. I think that's super important. I've learned in this process, like you cannot say like, hey, I'm so good at X, so I have to be good at Y as well. I just need to start from scratch, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, I think this podcast is a great example, right? Neither one of us has done a podcast before. Neither one of us feels comfortable sitting in front of a camera. But, each week we get slightly better at doing these podcasts. Each week we're gaining a little bit more confidence. Like if you look at the first episode of this podcast and how nervous both of us are versus like this podcast right now, there's been a dramatic kind of, increase in quality over the last 3 or 4 months that we've been doing this.
I think a lot of people may have contrarian views on this, but my perspective is that like work-life balance is a myth, especially if you're in your first 10 to 15 years. So here's why. If you think about your career, let's say you're going to spend 35 to 45 years, productive years, whatever you do in the earlier years and you learn those skills, you have way more time for those skills to compound. So the amount of effort and time you put in your first 10 years, the better off you are in your 20, in your next 10, in your 10 after that. If you optimize for work-life balance in your first year, second year, third year, what ends up happening is that the people who are not doing that, they'll just compound faster. The more effort and time you'll put in early on in your career, you have more flexibility later on. And later on in life, you have way more responsibilities, you have way more things going on, so you want more flexibility then. So I think early on in your career, you should be optimizing for that. Secondly,
100%.
Yeah, and then secondly, I think most people do not have connections or capital when they're starting out. What they have is their work ethic. They can work hard, they can deliver good outcomes, they can be consistent, and that's how you build your reputation. So just dive deep into that. I don't think like people should be concerned. I don't know, Zain, what's your opinion on that?
No, I agree with this. I think you don't have work-life balance in the short run, so you can have work-life balance in the long run. So for example, there's no 50-year-olds who are working 80 to 100 hours a week. I'm sure there are occasionally some, but the vast majority of people at that age are not working hard. Number one is they have family responsibilities, they have kids, they have spouses, sometimes they even have grandkids. So obviously they need to spend a little bit more time doing those things. And then finally, like physically, you're just not up to it, right? Like, when you're 25 or 30, you can work 12, 16 hours a day. When you're 50, it's not going to happen, right? Even when you're 40, it's really hard to grind as hard as you can in your 25. And the other reason is, even if they have more work-life balance, they're still quite effective later on in these years because, like Hassan said, early on, you haven't built up any leverage. You don't have any capital. You don't have any connections. You don't have any sort of good judgment built up. But over time, early, if you work hard in your career and, you build those skills, you build that judgment, you build those connections, you get that capital, that lets you basically deploy all those resources. So you have to spend less time and more of those resources, which ends up being, creates more work-life balance for you, right? So yeah, I think you want to front load the work and you want to sort of backload the balance later on. I think that's just my opinion, especially if you're the high achieving type, if you've got high ambitions, if you want to do really well, just better to maybe work really hard in the first 10 years of your career And then, later on, you can definitely have a lot more balance once you've reached a certain stage. Okay, so next up on the list, I want to talk about social intelligence. Some people like to call it soft skills as well, or people skills. I say that this matters just as much as IQ. So most people don't seem to really understand why this matters a lot, but the reality is, like, when you're in school, school is not a social game, right? School is a single player game where you don't need to cooperate for other people. Come to class, study, get good grades. You're good to go, right? So I think for a lot of people, that instills this idea that as long as I am, good at my job, or as long as I'm doing my work, I don't really need to talk to anyone else. But that's not how real life works, how adulthood works, how jobs work. Work and jobs and companies are multiplayer mode games where you do need cooperation and where social skills really end up mattering, right? Now, I'm not saying you need to, suck up to people, that you need to brown nose, that you need to do those things, but I think learning how to communicate effectively with people is really important. I think this matters even more, later on in your career, for example, when you start managing people. If you are not an effective communicator with your team, it's going to affect your entire team's performance. So if you have 10 employees under you who are working 50 hours a week, that is 500 hours of productivity. If you can communicate well with them in your weekly one-on-ones, suddenly those 500 hours are going to be productive. But if you cannot communicate well, if you do not have the goodwill of your employees, if you do not know how to motivate them, suddenly those 500 hours are going to waste. And a great book that I read on this, it's called The Formula by, I think his name is Albert Barbaz. He's a mathematician. And the idea of the book is that in some careers, so for example, sports where performance is extremely measurable, networks don't matter, right? So for example, you can either, score a certain amount of goals a year or you can't. It's a very measurable. But in a lot of careers, outcomes are less measurable. So the less measurable your skill is, the more your social skill ends up becoming important as a proxy for your actual skill. Is that right? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. But at the end of the day, there is a social component to every single job. It's really important to get competent on the social side of things as well.
So the next lesson I want to share is about information. Most things in life, you just do not have perfect information, and you have to make decisions with imperfect information, especially in your careers, right? So as an example, you're in college. Like when I was in college, I was like, hey, what should I do? I switched my majors from engineering to doing physics and economics because I didn't have full information, but I'm like, hey, this is the pathway I want to follow. I want to experiment more. I want to expand my opportunities. Then the second thing was like, hey, should I work in tech? Should I work in consulting? Should I do my own thing? I actually tried to build a startup, worked at Procter & Gamble, worked at a management consulting firm, worked at an investment bank. And then I decided like, hey, I really enjoy startups. And this is like, I can take risks. I have like high agency. I would really flourish in this environment. And then I ended up just joining a startup right after school. So I think the key thing is that in your life, in your career, there's no bad decisions. The key thing is just make sure that you are thoughtful about what you're trying to do with the imperfect information you have, and just say yes to a lot of opportunities, try to experiment. But whatever you're trying to do, just do it with like full passion.
The next one on the list is something I want to share around something connected to the one that we did earlier in this episode around taking more risks. I would say don't just take more risks. I would say actively fail more. So, one of the ways to measure whether you are taking on enough risk or not is whether you actually fail or you don't fail. And the reason why I want to draw specific attention to this one is because this, again, becomes very ingrained since school. So, in school, if you fail, often that means you've got to repeat the entire year. And it also comes with a very high social cost, right? Like your parents are embarrassed because, you just flunked the year. You're embarrassed to tell your friends. Suddenly, your friend group has moved on. Your peer group is a year ahead of you. You're 1 year behind. So in school, failing comes with a very high social cost. But in your careers, the cost probably isn't that high. In fact, I'd argue, and this is something I wrote on Twitter and that stuck with me, is the cost of failure has never been this low. Right? If you fail at a certain project on the job, honestly, in most cases, you can go ahead and recover yourself. If you even have a particular role that has not worked out in your career, you can often overcome it later. So the cost of failure is way more lower, and you should be taking on, be more comfortable with failure, I'd say. And the reason why I say this is because often you need to experiment to to find the thing that you're good at or find a big win in your career. And often finding a win or finding something you're really good at means, you will have some amounts of failure along the way. So the first thing that I launched is a course for executives to build a social media brand on Twitter and LinkedIn. I think it might have made, $7,000-8,000, but it definitely was not enough for me to switch into a new career. So definitely, would have classified that as a failure. Next thing that I did, I was really, had really honed in on LinkedIn as a platform, was really good at creating content for LinkedIn. So I started creating these pages on LinkedIn. I shopped them around to a bunch of different companies. The unanimous answer was nope, we're not interested in buying any pages. But what did happen on my 7th or 8th call is a company said, hey, could you guys help us build a page like this for our company? And I said, yeah, why not? We can do this. And, I landed maybe a $2,000 a month client. And over time, as I got better, as I ran more experiments, as I, failed through and got to better outcomes, ended up, with the media business, then ended up with the app business. So these are, just a very specific example that I wanted to give is sometimes cycling through failure is what you need to do to get to that win in the end or find that thing that you're actually quite good at.
I think like what you just said at the end, right? Like cycling through failures. I think I'll just add like cycling through failures, just staying resilient and focused on your goal and not trying to kind of think about like, hey, everything which I'm doing is like failing. But you should also like take feedback from other people, right? Like Zain, I remember, right? Like we were always discussing these ideas. You would have talked to other people who were experts in different sectors as well, try to get like their perspective as well to make sure like, hey, I'm on the right track. Like, how should I make it better? It's not like you're just like in a solo run and just like, hey, let's ignore everything else and I'm failing. So let's try something else. And then like you fail. But you got to like take some insights as well. And you got to stay resilient, right? Like eventually now like the businesses are doing really well. So I think that's super important for people to know as well.
Yeah. I think a connected lessons to this is Paul Graham, the co-founder of Y Combinator, the startup incubator that's produced startups such as Airbnb, Reddit, a few other big ones. When they asked Paul Graham about what makes the most successful startup founding teams, what he said is persistent, right? Like he talks about the Airbnb founders and he calls them cockroaches almost as a compliment because he says, because they were resilient, they never gave up, they stuck around. And that was a sign to him that, regardless of what their idea is, that these are entrepreneurs worth backing. But this applies to careers as well. Like being persistent really matters and cycling through those failures really matters. And another related great quote or lesson is from the entrepreneur or investor Naval Ravikant, who basically says it's not about 10,000 hours, it's about 10,000 iterations. So, I think one of the things that we were taught since kids is you got to work really hard. You need to put 10,000 hours at something to get better at that skill. The reality is you don't need to put in 10,000 hours doing the same thing because if you're doing the wrong thing, putting in 10,000 hours isn't going to change anything. It's about 10,000 iterations. It's about running 10,000 tiny experiments over time, over your career to really find the things that work. Cycling through failure to get to the win is a really important lesson that I've learned over the course of my career. Fuel your startup's growth with Google Cloud. Join the 90% of GenAI unicorns that trust Google Cloud. Get up to $350,000 in credits, access to cutting-edge AI tools, and expert guidance when you join. But why Google Cloud? Because they offer personalized support from experienced mentors, technical training to upskill your team, and a vibrant startup community to connect with like-minded founders. Ready to take the next step? Visit cloud.google.com/startup/apply to learn more and apply today.
I think like a nice transition from this is like another experiment, I think, which is very critical for people to run or a lesson is that a lot of your opportunities in life would come from folks you have met over time in your career. So how do you kind of increase your serendipity in your careers? Or another way to think about that is how do you increase the luck surface area for you? So early on in your career, like there are things like, hey, let me like do cold outreach to people, go meet coffee chats, build relationships with my university students, be part of student clubs, sports. All of these things are in essence increasing your luck surface area, right? Because you are doing things together, you're building credibility, you're building friendships as well. Most of these folks will go do on different things. So that's one example of that. Zain and I, as an example, met in college. We lived in different dorm rooms. We ended up connecting to one of the student associations, and we just became friends. We started like hanging out. Then Zain actually moved back to Canada from Europe, and he reached out again to me. Like we actually lost touch for 5 years because he transferred to a different university in Europe. But when he moved back to Canada, he reached out to me. We connected, and then started became roommates again. That's just an example of like increasing lux surface area. Now, after like 7-8 years of that, we're working together to build these companies, right? So you should always try to like stay in touch with folks or like reach out to folks. If someone does not respond to you, that's totally fine. That's not necessary as like rejection. There are like hundreds of people in the world. So I think that's one important thing is like always try to kind of like do actions which increase your lux surface area. So like all the actions, cold outreach, coffee chats, in your corporate sector, if you're working in a large company, go meet people for lunch. It's surprising to me how many people eat lunch at their desk. Just take 30 minutes and just eat it in the cafeteria or go out with like your colleagues, become friends. Or you don't show up to like evening events or social events. That's another example. Go to conferences. Go to like learning events as well, right? Like there are always like conferences which are just for like, improving your skill set. Try to go to those things, meet people, talk to people. Everyone at a conference is there to meet, but people just never go start a conversation. You can be the one. Start a conversation. Don't be hesitant. I don't know, Zain, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you can think of the idea of luck maybe a little bit broader than social connections as well. So, I think if you think about ROI, one way of think of ROI is, if for every hour of effort that I put in, how much revenue or money or salary can I generate down the line? I think another way to think about this is, for everything that I do, what are the chances of this becoming something potentially big down the line? So, I'd extend that, adjacent to networking. Like, for example, I personally I'm a little bit reserved. I don't like going to networking events. It's hard for me to kind of do cold outreach and kind of just talk to people like that. So what I did instead is I just started creating content, right? So content is one example of increasing the surface area of your luck. And I was posting for 2 months or so. My posts would get maybe 10, 20 likes. Most of those were like, my friends and my relatives. And then eventually, one post went big, got like, I think 4,000 or 5,000 likes. That got me my first kind of bit of followers, kind of, kept posting, out of maybe every 20, 30 posts, one would go big and so on. For some people, cycle is going to be slower. For some people, it's going to be faster, but that's an example of how I increase my surface area of luck. That surface area of luck, not only resulted in opportunities coming through folks who are following me, job opportunities, business opportunities, so on. It also led me basically to create all these businesses on top of the kind of, following and distribution that I built. So that is, one example of increasing surface area of luck. But another even more broader one is learning skills, right? So sometimes if you have the opportunity to learn a skill, maybe you're interested, maybe your company's paying for a course, maybe something else is happening, maybe you could have just picked up a book and learned about something, but the ROI isn't clear in the short term, right? So maybe, let's say you're a designer and, maybe you can learn how to code a little bit, but you're like, man, I'm not going to become an engineer. Why the hell am I, kind of learning how to code? But for people who kind of, designers who learned how to code a little bit 5 years ago, those folks, now that AI is mature enough to really help with coding, a lot of those designers are now going and building full-fledged apps, right? They could not have anticipated AI, but they increased their surface area of luck by picking up a new skill. So if you have the opportunity to build adjacent skills or new skills, especially if they're only going to take 2 or 3 hours a week, I'd highly encourage you to take them on as a way to increase your surface area of luck.
I think next lesson I would like to share, which I think is I found to be like really critical is that, and I think especially as when you are 22, 23, a lot of people are impatient, but I think a lot of success requires patience. And this is like something I learned over time. I wish I had learned it like early on in my career, is that like just be patient and be patient for the long term with a sense of urgency in the short term, because skills will take time to compound, relationships will take time to compound, the things you are working on will take time to compound. If you just try to like rush through everything, you may not actually see great results. But do not be patient from a delivery perspective, outcome perspective. So this is kind of like a fine balance, right? On a daily basis, you should have a sense of urgency. Let me try to do as much as possible I can with the right direction and in the same direction, and let those things compound. Wait for a year, 2 years, and you will see great results. If you're working on interesting things, you're working with interesting people, you are letting the results are kind of like starting to like build up. And suddenly, 1 year down the road, you will see a spike. A great example of this is that, the first time I worked on a startup, we raised a Series A, a seed round, pre-seed, but the startup failed. And, it was a pretty unfortunate journey that, hey, you raised like $35 million, you ended up like, with a zero, in essence, in your pocket. But the next time we did the startup, we ended up selling to Snowflake. I could have just given up the first time we tried because we worked very hard for 3+ years. But a lot of the lessons which I learned in that process allowed me to have a much more successful journey the second time around. The third time around, the journey was even more successful because now the playbook was much more refined. But this is over like almost a 10-year time period. But this was all the factor of compounding, being patient, networks building up over time, skills building up over time, people you worked with trusting you more, your credibility starting to add up. When I was starting out, I could have never imagined doing things which I did in the 8th and 9th and 10th year.
I'm picking up two broad lessons from everything that you said. I think the first one is you want to be impatient with action, but patient with results, right? You need to put in the work today, and you need to sort of, sow that seed so you can see that tree, that plant or that tree grow like, a year, 5 years, or 10 years from now. And then, sort of like the second broad lesson that I'm gleaning from this is just having a longer time horizon when it comes to effort. So I think, one thing that I've seen, and I've been so guilty of this early on in my career, is just focusing on the next dollar, not on like maybe the millionth dollar and so on. And that leads to kind of short-sightedness and just impatience. If you're too focused on the outcome early on, important to be outcome-oriented, but if you're too outcome-oriented in the short run, it often leads to suboptimal decisions. So yeah, I think just to sum up Hassan's point, I hope I've added a little bit more nuance and value to that.
Yeah, no, I think I'll just like summarize some of the key things, right? There are a lot of pathways for successful careers. So, always try to be open-minded, try to find good mentors, good partners who kind of, or like, stakeholders who can help you through your career. Listen, learn from other folks who have done it before you. A lot of playbooks can be recycled and reused. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, be a good human being, try to take risks, have a good work ethic, work hard, don't say no a lot, especially early on in your career, say yes. And in most cases, you would have a higher probability of succeeding.
Yeah. I'd also like add one last thing as we kind of tune out, and this is very cliche advice, but I'll explain why this is so true, is work on stuff you love, right? Especially stuff that is driven by your curiosity. The reality is if any good outcome is going to take 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you want to work on stuff that you love, that you're interested in, because that's how you're going to spend more time, more energy, more focus on that thing than anyone else, right? Just think of two things, right? Like think about any task. Let's just say someone who, let's take writing, for example, right? I write a newsletter, for example. Let's just say someone genuinely enjoys writing. I genuinely enjoy writing. I write on weekends. I write in my free time. I don't need to get paid to write anything. I just love writing. Writing led me to building my audience. Writing then led me to building the newsletter today. But for some people, it's like drudgery. They hate doing it. I talk to so many other newsletter operators that are like, oh man, I freaking hate writing. Can't wait to hire someone to do this stuff. It's just not my thing. And with all due respect to them, they're just not as good as me because they don't love the thing. Like it's very clear. It's not down to some growth hack, some tactic, something else there. The reality is like, I just love it. And I just am spending that little bit extra time, energy, attention, passion on that thing than the person next to me is, right? So don't spend time on things where it's not driven by genuine curiosity, genuine love of the thing. Because if you do that, you're always going to fall behind because the guy next to you who actually love, or the girl next to you who loves the thing is going to put in so much more time, so much more energy doing that. And you'll just, over time, the gap really opens up because skills and outcomes really do compound over time. And just also think about it from a human perspective. If you're going to spend 3, 5, 10 years of your life doing something, do you really want to spend those years of your life doing something you don't enjoy just so you can make more money? It's there's like this quote of, people spend, working hard to, get job titles they don't need to make more money, that they don't need to spend, money on things they don't even enjoy, to impress people that they don't even like in the first place, right? It's something along those lines. So the reality is like, it's a bad way to kind of spend life is just, focus on the monetary outcome or the title and, put yourself through endless suffering to get there. Yes, some level of suffering and sacrifice is involved in getting to that outcome. But at the same time, honestly, if you can enjoy it, why not enjoy it? And trust me, most successful people, I would say 80-90% of successful people do genuinely enjoy the stuff that they're doing. Every time I talk to other entrepreneurs, when I talk to other artists, when I talk to other folks who are really good at their jobs, it's evident within the first 10-15 minutes that they really love what they do and they've gone really deep on that thing, and it's driven by curiosity and passion, not just a monetary incentive. So yeah, final piece of advice, very cliche, but it's rung true for me. Focus on what you love. And yeah, hopefully this podcast has been insightful. I hope it's been educational. Let us know what you think about this podcast. My email, zain@superhuman.ai. So that's ZAIN@superhuman.ai. Send me an email. I read every single email. I respond to almost every single one of them. Sometimes they get missed. I apologize. But, and we do take suggestions for shows. So if there's any specific question or any specific topic you'd like us to address on a future podcast, reach out. Let me know what you think. And hey, if you really like this, please share this with someone you like and drop us a review. If not, we still appreciate you listening to this podcast, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks for listening.